I have a very special guest today. We are going to be talking with Birjan Crispin. He is a legislative aide in the Indiana House of Representatives, and he is a Gen Zer who is here to give us his perspective on the recent election, where we're headed over the next 4 years, and politics in general from the perspective of his generation. And so I am thrilled to have this conversation, and I hope you will stay with us for the Unhindered podcast. Hi, Birjan.
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be with you.
Yes, I'm excited to talk to you today. Can you just start by telling my audience who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, thank you, Kelly, first and foremost, fan of the show. Watch some of your episodes. Great stuff. I appreciate the desire to dig into subject material and talk about it. So, as our former Vice President Mike Pence would say, I'm a Christian, conservative, Republican in that order, and those are the things that drive who I am as an individual. I was born in Bulgaria, adopted when I was 2 years old, was raised in Wheaton, Illinois. Went to Hope College in Holland, Michigan for my undergrad in finance and political science. I now serve in the Indiana State Legislature as legislative staff, involved in the Indiana Family Institute Hoosier Leadership Series, working hard with my colleagues and coworkers to further advance the principles of faith, family, and freedom. I'm excited to dive more into that with you today.
Awesome. I'm very excited about that. Those are values of mine as well. And why I have this podcast really is all of those things plus relationships, marriage, and health. So we are on the same page for sure because that all goes together. What led you to get into politics?
So for me, politics is just the way that we go about discussing different issues. We all want a safe, free, and fair America. And so politics is just the disagreement about how we get there. And so for me, I'm terrible at math and science. I'm just not good at it. Other people are great at it. But for me, I enjoy public speaking, relationship building, digging down to the bottom of why we believe what we do, understanding the different worldviews that make up this country. And so politics just felt like the natural path for me. And it's been a journey ever since I wanted to dive into that a few years ago. And I'm happy to discuss more of that moving forward.
Yeah, awesome. I actually have a son who's majoring in political science right now. And he's a freshman. So, do you have any advice for young people who are starting out in this?
Sure. I would first and foremost try and understand the why. Trying to understand why you want to get in the political world. Is it to climb the ladder? Is it to make a difference? You have to understand your why before you can actually go out and execute on the field. And so that would be one. Another one would be to find someone that you look up to in the political world and try and emulate some of their worldview and try and emulate some of the things that you admire about them. So for me, it's people like Mike Pence. It is Paul Ryan, Ron DeSantis, people like that that I can look up to and try and emulate as I continue in my career. And then another one is just be open to whatever God has for you. A lot of times we like to live on, or it's like we like to hold on to things with clenched fists, and we're not open to what the Lord has for us on our journey. And so, being able to live open-handed, saying, use the gifts and the strengths that I've been given to be able to help make an impact. And I think those things, putting them together, will lead you to success in your career. Maybe not in the way that you thought it would go, but in the way that is intended for you to be able to live out your personal life calling. And so, political science is a great field. There's a lot of different things you can do with that, whether it's running for office, running campaigns, being in the press and communication side of things. There's a whole host of things that you can do to pursue your calling, and I would highly encourage that.
Great advice. Yeah, it's so important to know what you're moving toward and why you're moving there, and to have those role models in front of you that you can look up to and say, yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that I want to aspire to, but also holding that loosely because God has a specific plan for you. So I think that's great advice. Um, we just had a major election, in case you didn't notice. And I'm sure, given that we are on the same page politically, that you are just as thrilled and relieved as I am. It was great to see the red wave, as they call it. And so I'd love to start out just doing a little election recap with you and just hear your thoughts about the recent election.
Yeah, well, Kelly, I haven't gotten much sleep over the past few days. It has been a whirlwind of results coming in and emotions, and it's been a great week for conservatives. But I would also caution the Republican Party to not become complacent. It's easy to be complacent when you win, and to just coast. And we thought we would have a red wave in 2022, and that didn't happen. In fact, we actually lost a couple of seats in 2022. And so I would caution the Republican Party to be excited about this, go for it, but also to keep the foot on the gas and keep advancing these principles of faith, family, and freedom. Because without that, we're going to lose in the next election. And so be excited about it. That's great. Celebrate. Let's go ahead and keep inching the ball down the field 10 yards at a time. And let this not be the end, but rather the continuation of where we want to go. As far as the results coming in, I'm obviously happy that President Trump will be returning to the White House this time, which I think with what I think is a much more laser focused agenda, ready to go. He knows how to staff. He knows what he wants to do. He's much more prepared than he was for his first term, naturally. And so I'm excited for what's ahead. I'm excited for the future of the country, politically speaking. It looks like we're going to have the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so that is the trifecta to have. And I'm excited for some of the legislation we can push through. I would just urge against complacency and continue to keep seeing the vision of where we want to go and keep working towards that goal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's especially after such a big fight. And it's all your adrenaline's up and we're all a little, on pins and needles waiting to see what's going to happen. You feel a sense of relief and you kind of just want to sit back in that and be like, whew, glad that fight is over. But this only lasts 4 years, so we have to that's politics, that's elections. We always have to be ramping up to the next thing, and even though, I am not directly in that, of course, but I am part of that as, a YouTuber who talks on these topics, and tries to influence people in a positive direction. So, I know you're in that, and we're all to some extent in the fight in some way, shape, or form, even if it's just talking with our loved ones, and so we can't get complacent and take our foot off the gas. Yeah. One of the reasons that I think Trump will be so great for our country and why I'm so excited about our win is because I feel like he is the one that has what it takes to renew America's strength, right? He's got the motto "Make America Great Again," which is really about that. And over the past several decades, at least since the 60s, if not maybe since the World Wars. I'm not sure exactly, but definitely for several decades, I feel like America has been in a decline. And especially in my lifetime, I was born in 1980. And so, things seemed better under Reagan. Of course, I was a kid, but it seemed good to me. And I hear that others have that same sentiment. And so, in your opinion, what are the things that make a country strong? What would make America great again? And also, what are the things that you think weaken a country?
So I think in order to better answer that question, we first have to define what we mean by when it was great again, identify time periods. So you mentioned the Reagan era, post World War II, with the baby boom and economic growth. Those kind of things we have to identify because what happens is we'll say something like that, and then the left will say, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." Oh, actually, when was it great? And we can't actually decide when that was. And so um, identifying those time periods, as you said, that's great. As far as what makes a country strong, I'll first start with what makes a country weak. I think one is the lack of national identity. And over the past, let's say, 30 years or so, American identity has become muddled and confused. We don't know what we stand for as a nation anymore. And part of that has to do with the sexual revolution, and losing how we view the American family. My argument is where the American family goes is where society goes, and where society goes is where the country goes. And if we don't understand what we're doing as a family unit and we're confused about gender, sexual orientation, the structure of the family, society is going to weaken and crumble. That's exactly what we've seen. Well, now the traditional American family is not as common and popular anymore. In fact, if you talk about those things, you are ostracized and pushed aside. And so I think we need to bring that back as the main focal point of how we make America strong again. Another one is deterrence, and President Trump has has plenty of great stories about this. One of them, he was sitting across from the leader of the Taliban, and he said, "We will leave Afghanistan if you abide to these certain rules, and if you don't, we will come after you." And he handed the leader of the Taliban a picture of his house. And the leader of the Taliban said, "Why do you show me a picture of my house?" And he said, "Because we know where you live, and we're going to come after if you don't abide by our rules and are pull out of Afghanistan." And it's that example of America's strength and deterrence that we need to get back to. And I think the Trump administration is ready to go on that. Within one day of him being elected, Hamas has called for an end. They've called for a ceasefire. He's been on the phone with President Zelensky of Ukraine, talking about an end to the war in Ukraine. And you see such a stark difference in a Trump administration versus the Biden administration that was all over the place and confused and didn't put America first. And so back to your question, I think we need to reaffirm, realign, and redefine what our cultural and what our American identity is, and then understand how to be more of a deterrent on the international stage, and also cut regulation, make sure that we're increasing the desire for competition within our markets and within our companies, and making sure we can grow at a steady rate and truly make this country great once again.
I love that. And I do think one of the big issues is that we have lost our identity. I agree with that. And I know Vivek Ramaswamy talked a lot about that when he was campaigning. And I liked a lot of what he had to say. That was one of the primary things that really stood out to me that I thought, yeah, he's got it. That's exactly what's going on. We're not united in one identity anymore. And from my viewpoint, I think that a lot of that is because we removed God from the center. And so we're not identifying as a Christian nation anymore. Although we are still a nation with a lot of Christians in it, I don't think we are. In name, we our leaders, our presidents, they'll still say "God bless America" and things like that. But indeed, in policies, we don't seem to be a nation founded on God anymore, and God has been removed, from so many places in the public sector. And so I think that's contributed to us losing our identity. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on where we can go from here in terms of getting back an identity, and is it possible to unite again? We seem to be so divided between what I see as good and evil, and maybe it's not possible to unite. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it is possible to unite, but before we talk about unification on a national stage, we have to talk about unification with our own homes and neighborhoods, and that's where it starts. We can't, win the game by throwing a Hail Mary on our own 10-yard line. We have to inch the ball down the field 10 yards at a time. And so it starts within our own homes. It starts with reigniting the dignity within our communities and our neighborhoods. And by one community at a time, one neighborhood at a time, one city at a time, one state at a time, we could start to redefine what it means to be an American. We can start to unify together and slowly change this country over time. It's not going to happen immediately. There's a lot of work to do, but yes, I am hopeful that we can unite once again. And I think you saw some of this in the election, not only with President Trump winning the electoral vote, but also winning the popular vote by a substantial margin. Most of the country voted for him to become the next president and for him to lead us into this new golden age, as he says, and to truly make America great again. And so I think we are often depicted as being more divided than we are united. And I think the opposite is true. And I think when it comes down to everyday Main Street America, I think Americans are a lot more united than we are divided. And that's what I have hope in, is that we can look into each other's eyes with a dignity, knowing that we're made in the image of God, knowing that we are brothers and sisters in Christ, and knowing that we can truly work together to make our communities, our cities, and our states better over time. And as far as removing God from our society, I think um, part of that falls on the responsibility of the churches to get up, to get engaged, to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And I think a lot of the churches in America and religious institutions in America have become apathetic and scared about the consequences of getting engaged in the political fight. And so I would encourage pastors and people in the community to make sure we're getting engaged in our churches, making sure you're taking a stand for what's right and for truth, whether it comes to how we treat our neighbors that are different from us, how we treat the issue of pro-life from natural from conception to natural death. Those kind of things that we need to be more engaged in. And I think with churches taking more of a stand with being more vocal about what we believe in, I think over time you will see America become more united than we are divided, and that's what I have to look forward to.
Awesome. Yeah, I could not agree more with churches and pastors taking more of a stand. I talk about that a lot on the show that it really probably was the primary impetus for me starting this was continuing to hear weak, diluted, lukewarm sermons and realizing that we as people, as Christians, as Americans, we need more than that. We need leadership within the church. And I understand they're not going to necessarily say vote for this person, vote for that person, but I feel like they're trying to not offend anyone on either side all the time, and they're just coming across as lukewarm, which we know the Bible says, I wish that you were hot or cold. If you're lukewarm, I will spit you out. So I was like, if they're not going to speak, I have to speak. I feel compelled to speak. I've got to start talking on these issues. However many people end up listening to me, it's fine. It doesn't have to, I know I'd love to grow my following, but I just feel like we can't have too many voices for truth out there. And I will be one more voice that is standing up and speaking out. So I am with you on that. What on that topic, what do you think? What type of role should Christians play in politics? Should they get involved in politics, and running for office and leadership? What are your thoughts on that?
I would encourage Christians to get involved as much as they possibly can. Not every Christian is going to run for office. Not everyone is going to run a campaign. Not everyone is going to be a party chairman or something like that. But we all have a responsibility. It's mandated to get involved one way or another by standing up for what you believe in, like with your podcast, Kelly, and standing up for what you believe in and being a voice for truth. It is amazing to me the amount of people that I talk to that say, I've never been political before. I've always been worried about what people are going to say, but I just felt like I couldn't be silent any longer. And there's a massive amount of people that feel that way and are starting to do the things that you are doing and standing up for truth and speaking up about what you believe in. And I think it starts there. And then there are other avenues for people to get involved. But I do think that Christians cannot be complacent. They have to act with a sense of urgency because we know that this is not all this world has, and we know that the story is already written. We know how it ends. We know that Christ will come again and be victorious. And so, with that in mind, we can live with courageous faith. We can be bold. We can live with conviction, and we can treat each other the way that Christ tells us to treat others as well. And we have to know that everyone that we interact with, as C.S. Lewis said, is an immortal being one way or another. And so we have to treat each other with that in mind and knowing that we have to treat each other with love and respect and dignity and kindness and try to win them over to our side in a way with a winsomeness that is attractive, that is sweet, that will show them that this is how God has called you to live. And so that can be in the political sphere. It can be other things as well. But Christians do need to get involved. We need to stand up for what's right, and for what the Bible says. And so there absolutely is a mandate to get involved one way or another. And I think it's so important as we move forward in the years to come.
I agree. I hear people talking about, Christians should just stay out of politics. They might be offending or turning away the people they're trying to save, and things like that. But I think so. We're just going to surrender leadership to non-Christians to dictate, what happens in our lives, and to, that's just bringing in asking for persecution later down the road, right? Political persecution. So I think we are called to be leaders. I'm curious among, I'm assuming you're Gen Z, or you,
Yes,
okay.
I think I'm on the tail end of millennial, early Gen Z.
Okay. I'm curious to hear what do you see among people your age? What seems to be important to them? What divides them? What is the best way for those of us older to reach people your age?
Well, I would say that first and foremost, that people my age and the generation below are struggling with an identity crisis. There's so much that the world throws at us that can be attractive, and it is so easy to get drawn astray to what actually is true and good. And I think you're seeing my generation and future generations struggling with how do I fit into the bigger picture? And I think people so badly want to be involved in something bigger than themselves, but they're trying to find that in ways that aren't sustainable and will only leave you hurt and disappointed and without meaning. I would encourage those older than me, those in mentorship roles or capabilities, uh, parents and grandparents, teachers, whatever it may be, um, to really be intentional about the way that you're living because. Uh, Whether you know it or not, we are watching and we are paying attention and we're desperately looking for good role models, people to emulate as we try and navigate this messy world that we live in. That's a big one. I would say what divides us is our own worldview. I like to say that I would have more in common right now with a 1950s, 1960s Democrat than I would with maybe someone who is very, very far right on that side of the aisle. And I think back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was about tax cuts. It was about regulation. It was about how do we properly care for those who don't have what we have in terms of welfare. Um, and those were the arguments along party lines. And now it's become so split because we're talking about two totally different worldviews. It's not policy anymore. Policy is the manifestation of those worldviews, but we're talking about two competing sets of worldviews that naturally are at odds with each other because it's about values. And so if you have people from opposite sets of values that are competing and arguing with each other, naturally there's going to be a divide. And so I think we need to better understand our own worldview. For me, it's a biblical Christian conservative worldview. For others, it's a naturalist secularist worldview that puts themselves at the center of the universe and and tries to put policy in to help people that maybe isn't done the right way. And so we need to better understand our worldviews so we can finally come together and maybe figure out a good way to move forward. So, as talking about what divides us, it's our worldview, it's a lack of understanding of a greater meaning. How can we improve? Try and find things that can help us grow in our capabilities and our understanding of how do we fit into a better picture, how do we fit in the bigger picture um, of life in general, and also then to emulate those who are in leadership roles that we can trust and follow because those mentors and those leaders matter.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. All the videos I've been seeing this week of people crying about the election and upset are all very young women, like early 20s, white women usually, not always. I saw a statistic today that white progressive females are farther left than any other group. Even minority groups, they have gone so far to the left. I'm not sure what's caused that exactly, if it's, university indoctrination. Obviously, feminism has gotten into their heads, and many forms of media. They watch and follow celebrities who are feminists. And so I came to Christ when I was 20. So I remember being a teenager and thinking that I knew everything and I was the center of the world. And I think it's important that we do live by example. And these girls don't seem happy to me. It saddens me. And I think that if we can show by example that uh, living the way that we're living actually does produce more contentment and satisfaction and happiness in life, then maybe that will be attractive to them and they will consider a different ideology than the one that they're following.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to identify those things and really come alongside young people that are struggling and because we are the future leaders of this country. And so if we want more people to live their lives in such a way that emulates a Christian conservative biblical worldview, then we need to better equip. It's really easy to point and say, oh, they're not, living a certain way, but if we're not coming alongside them, we're not helping and we're not teaching and training and equipping, then we're just as culpable. And so I think we need to do a better job of that, but it's also really encouraging to see the amount of young men from ages 18, I think it was to 30, swung in a huge direction towards President Trump and a lot of other people as well. And so I think you are seeing a reawakening of a desire to live out the American dream in a way that aligns with our constitutional values, and that does give me a lot of hope.
Yeah, me too. I was really encouraged to see so many men stepping into their masculinity in a positive way, in a leadership protector type of way. I have two sons. That are young and they are conservative, and I see some of their friends, turning that way and turning to Christ, and it's just, I think the male leadership is going to be so important. And I know that the feminism movement is, their skin is crawling as they hear me say that, but that's because they have a negative view. They think that masculinity is toxic. I have an episode on that I will link here. Masculinity is not toxic. But I think that we're going to see that play out because the feminism movement has pushed things so far that they're um, provoking the males to stand up and be the men that God has called them to be. And so I think it's actually, what the devil means for bad, God means for good, and God is using that in a positive way, I see. So this podcast is called the Unhindered Podcast because every week I try to bring out something that is keeping people hindered in their life. Usually a lie that they're believing or a way that they're thinking or behaving that holds them back. And so I always ask my guests, what is, and you can give more than one thing, but what is something that you think people are believing that is hindering them in life?
Well, Kelly, I think there's a couple answers to that. I think one thing that people are believing that simply isn't true, that is hindering their ability to lead in their communities, is that um, their sense of self is wrapped up in their own personal identity and goals that is abstract, that is disconnected from a Christian biblical worldview. And I would make the argument to anybody. And I think it is so easy to believe what the world tells us, that we need to get a fancy, cushy job, that we need to find and marry the exact right person, that we need to live in a specific house and do this exact thing. And I think all of those things, while sounds good, will leave you disappointed and void of meaning. And we live so often in that culture because there's so much thrown at us. And so I think one way to combat that, like I've talked about, is to find people that you can connect with that have been where you've been, and to really lean into a mentorship and accountability type of relationship with someone. That's a big one. Another one is that as a Christian or conservative, your vote doesn't matter. Every vote matters, and we saw a huge turnout in this past election as a referendum on that idea. But so many people live in such a way that's saying, I'm not going to get engaged, I'm not going to get involved because it just doesn't matter. And every person matters, regardless of what side you're on. Even if you're a far left progressive Democrat or liberal, your voice and your vote still matters because we live in a constitutional republic where it says that your vote and your voice matters. And so that's another one. Get engaged, get involved. And then I think another way that we live in perhaps a hindered way is, I think, limiting our sense of what we can accomplish within the right context and with the right people around you. I think we often don't want to do something because we're scared of what other people are going to think or what they're going to say. When in reality, if we know how the story's already written, we know how it ends, we can live that much more freely to be able to serve other people and to really pursue the values that make up our great communities and our great societies. So I would say if people saying you can't do something because of your age or what you believe or whatever it is, I would say to surround yourself with a group of people that can hold you accountable, to keep you on the straight and narrow, but to pursue what God has called for you, because what He's called for you is much greater than anything else that we could ever do on our own, and anything else that the world is telling us. So those are a couple of things that I think people live in a hindered way. That if they truly, peel back the blinds a little bit, could live in a much more unhindered way.
I agree with all of that. Especially, I feel like I talk about the first one a lot on here, that we are believing the lies that certain things will satisfy that don't satisfy. Just so often chasing after the wrong things. And I was just listening to a podcast this morning of this new 4B movement where women are just the feminism movement has just gone so far, but I won't go down that. I already talked about that enough today. So where do you see us going over the next 4 years? What do you think is in store for us with Trump in the White House?
Well, I think we can look at his first term as kind of a projection as to what we're going to see in his second term. I think you're going to see a much more laser focused approach on foreign policy. I think you're going to begin to see peace in the Middle East. I think you're going to see uh, uh, getting back into the Abraham Accords. I think you're going to see the United States pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. I think you're going to see us destabilizing the Iranian regime when it comes to um, really putting a chokehold on their oil supply. I think that's a big one. You're going to see a safer state of Israel, which I think is great and absolutely paramount to the success of the health of the Middle East. I think you're going to see us opening up the Keystone Pipeline and drill, baby, drill, as President Trump has said multiple times on the campaign trail. You're going to see us become energy independent again, and that's great because then we can lower our gas prices, increase manufacturing. You're going to see a decrease in regulation, allowing companies to be able to compete and invest in American growth, and that's something I'm looking forward to seeing over the next 4 years. And I also think on more of an ideological level, I think you're going to see a unification across the country, a reinstilling of our conservative constitutional values moving forward in a much better, brighter American future. If you choose to be pessimistic about where the country is going, you can point out a ton of different things that are wrong, and there are a lot of things that are wrong. But if we choose to be optimistic and hopeful for where we can go, I think we can truly accomplish some great things. And so those are some of the things I'm looking forward to seeing in the next 4 years and the years after. But as I said in the open, Kelly, we cannot be complacent. We have to keep the foot on the gas. Otherwise, we may see losses in the midterms or in 2028. And we definitely don't want that. So keep pushing ahead, keep striving towards the goal, living to serve each other, and reigniting the dignity and humanity in our fellow American. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens.
I'm excited. I'm very, very excited. Um, Awesome. Is there anything else that you would like to share, or is there any way that people can find out more about you or stay in touch with you, follow you maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Instagram, Birjan Crispin 98. Would love to connect with you. You're happy to put some of the stuff in the link in the description below afterwards. And so I'd be happy to connect with you, talk more about these things. But just as a parting note, I want to say thank you, Kelly, for the opportunity to come on your show. And I would just encourage people to be hopeful about what's to come, to really lean into the God-given gifts that He's given you, and to really pursue your calling and to live out these Christian conservative constitutional values that are laid before us in our founding documents, to know that we can truly serve each other and we can truly make America great again.
Awesome. Maybe we can touch base again before the next election.
That'd be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Berjan.
Thank you, Kelly.